preaching about parables. It's a pity Romans were so convoluted, otherwise I would have gone there. But here we go. So parables, you might have been taught in Sunday school, are earthly stories with heavenly meanings. Rubbish. That's something we have to unlearn as adults. Parables are earthly stories with heavy meanings. Guess who's been in a meeting all week? That makes that Freudian stuff. Okay, so parables are not earthly stories with heavenly meanings. Parables are earthly stories with heavy meanings. I'm very grateful for Chris's sermon 2 weeks ago. And just to remind you, the 2 points that I found helpful was that Jesus speaks in parables, but often when Matthew speaks, he speaks in allegory. So we all know what allegory is. You know the story of Animal Farm by George Orwell? That's an allegory. And it's an allegory, my thing is just, it's an allegory that criticizes totalitarian regimes. And it ends with the critical story is the Communist Manifesto, because the animals want to build an equal society. They rebel against the mistreatment of their human owner, and it sort of ends with all animals are equal. But some animals, like the pigs, are more equal than others. So that's an allegory. And so the same applies when we come into the gospel. This is how Chris's insight empowers us. Jesus often speaks in parables. Now, parables, they kind of set a scene for you. And you're meant to kind of wander in the sea. And there's ordinary things from your earthly life, but there's always a twist to turn your understanding completely upside down. And when we come to Matthew, he often speaks in allegories. So in Matthew chapter 13, we have 7 parables about the kingdom of heaven. So just to be clear, when Matthew uses the phrase kingdom of heaven, he means kingdom of God. Good Jewish people don't like to use the word God, so he uses heaven instead of God. And so just also to be clear, the kingdom of God is right here, right now. It's a state of friendship that we might have with God. It's not some pie-in-the-sky future palace that we go to when we die. Okay? So the kingdom of God is the type of society that we might have were we to follow the precepts of Jesus. So when we come to the parables, if we just have a parable, the balance of probability lies in that being from the mouth of Jesus. But when we have a parable and an explanation, the balance of probability lies in that being Matthew's interpretation and Matthew's allegory. So I'm going to begin with the parable today that perhaps might cause us most consternation. I've explained before that the Gospel of Matthew is written for a community in Antioch who have survived the total destruction of the temple in Jerusalem. Their priests have been annihilated, and the sacrificial system has now come to an end. So the Hebrew faith has had to change, and so there's a deeper focus on teaching of the Torah, instead of the usual sacrifices that have happened in the temple. So when we come to Matthew's Gospel, what we have there as a background is this hostile infighting between Pharisaic Jewish leaders on the one hand and Christian Jewish leaders on the other hand. So there's a family feud that's going on here. Now, I don't know about your families, but the feud that you might have with your neighbor is nothing compared with the feud that you might have with a brother or sister. There's something about being closely related to someone that makes that fight hostile in a way that a fight with a neighbor would never be. So, for example, I was on retreat this week and we welcomed as a highlight the Roman Catholic Bishop, Bishop Greg. Now, he's an absolute delight. I love and adore the man. I watch his sermons, but he's Roman Catholic. But here in Alstonville, exactly what's wrong with it? He's a beautiful, saintly man. Here in Alstonville, we work with Seventh-day Adventists and we work with Baptists. And yes, they might have some weird ideas, but we forgive them because they're Seventh-day Adventist and Baptist after all, and we just work together and all is well. But I'll tell you what, put some of us in the same room with our Anglican brethren from a certain capital city, and it's all we can do to stop blood being shed. And the point that I've tried to make there is to show you how hostile family infighting can be compared to fighting with neighbours, okay? So we can feel it. So that's what's happening when this parable of the net is told. You know, where the good fish are in and the bad fish are out, and the bad fish can not go to hell. That's what the parable is saying. So it's certain members of one family saying to certain members of another family, look, you mob can't go to hell. That's what that parable is about. So it's not an external denunciation. It's an internal denunciation. So that's important. We can read a similar parable in something called the Gospel of Thomas. Now, some people say it was written quite late, in about 140 AD, but there's other scholars that I tend to agree with that suggest it might have been written as early as 60 AD. And there's a similar parable in the Gospel of Thomas, and it goes like this. A man is like a skilled fisherman who cast his net into the sea. He brought it up out of the sea, full of little fishes, and among them the skilled fisherman found one that was big and excellent. He threw all the little fishes back into the sea. Without hesitating, he chose the big fish. He who has ears to hear, let him hear. Can you see how Matthew has manipulated this parable into an allegory of his own to denounce people within his own family group that he happens to disagree with? So, in summary, the parable of the net is not an external renunciation of non-believers, but an internal renunciation within the one family. It's to the other parables that I wish to turn, because they are far more exciting. You may have heard that the mustard seed is an obnoxious, invasive, forbidden weed. It is so toxic that even rabbis forbid anyone from planting it in a garden. If we were to contextualize this parable in the northern rivers, it would be like a macadamia farmer deliberately planting a camphor laurel tree. That's the type of shock that this parable is offering. And that's how we know that the balance of probability lies in it being a parable of Jesus. Okay, when there's shock, it's probably Jesus. So that's quite exciting. So the kingdom of God is this forbidden, obnoxious weed that is planted. Not only that, the kingdom of God is like leaven, like yeast. Now, this is a female kind of substance. It's leftover bread that is put in a dark and damp place until the bread is rotted and decayed into mold, which is then used as a type of yeast that abundantly expands the dough. This is quite different from unleavened bread, which we eat at a Passover feast. Unleavened bread is male, it is holy, It symbolizes spiritual power. If you've ever participated in a Passover meal, there's this game where the youngest child has to go and look for the hidden sin, the leaven, and he gets a prize when he finds the hidden leaven. Do you remember that game from Passover feasts that we have had here? So leaven represents sin. It's like this ball, but there's connotations with femininity and the dark hiddenness of all that's involved there. So to just bring this to a summary, on the one hand, we have weeds and woman and the wild. On the other hand, we have the patriarchal, the tamed, and the settled city-state civilization, what we might call the military-industrial complex. When the Hebrew ancestors of old brought their abundance for the harvest festival, now in years gone by, we may have had harvest festivals here. It's a dedication of your first crop. There was this liturgy that they recited, which came from Deuteronomy chapter 5, verse 9, and it goes like this: "A wandering Aramaean is my ancestor." And so what they are saying is that a feral, wild nomad, an escaped slave, is my ancestor. So they are remembering a time that is not domesticated, a time that is wild and untamed. It's a way of confessing that we belong to a movement where our ancestral line is anyone who has left the oppressive city-state system and relearned the skills to live wild on the land like an escaped slave, free. This is all based on the manna story. You know, when Moses and Miriam led the slaves from Egypt to wander in the desert for 40 years before landing in a place of milk and honey. So the manna story. So manna is a type of aphid defecation. If I was not in Rhodes, I might use another more colloquial Australian word, but we'll go with aphid defecation, and in your head you can translate. So these are scale insects herded by ants, and they eat tamarisk leaves, and they poop out about 130% of their body weight every hour. And this puddles at the base of plants and can be gathered up and baked into honey cakes. So Arab dwellers in the Sinai desert today still collect this stuff, and they call it man, which is a probable cognate of the Hebrew word manna. Manna. Moses learned how to rely on the land for its provision while he was being deprogrammed for 40 years from his city-state, tame, domesticated slave self. So Jesus is asking, is the kingdom of God like this? Is the kingdom of God a weed, intrusive, uncontrollable, wild, and dangerous? He's asking if the kingdom of God points back behind our agricultural revolution, behind our plowed fields, to a growth that is unauthored and unauthorized. I'm reminded of the words of Marcus Borg and John Cresson, who say that Jesus was crucified not by evil men doing evil deeds. I just lost it there. So Jesus was crucified not by evil dudes doing evil deeds. But by the normalcy of civilization. It was just business as usual. The Roman Empire doing its usual bureaucracy that crucified Jesus. And in more recent times, I'm grateful for the work of Hannah Arendt, who says that the Holocaust of the Jews, again, wasn't evil men doing evil things. It was the banality of bureaucracy. It was as banal as that. It was bureaucrats, managers, just going through a bureaucratic system, a normal 9-to-5 day in the office. And so this is what the parable is asking of me. It's up to you to decide what it's asking of you. But for me, it's asking this question. Do I want to submit to the normalcy of civilization? Do I want to submit to the banality of bureaucracy? Or do I want to live wild and free like reeds and yeast? Do I want to do business as usual? You know, bigger budget for the military? Or do I want to be wild and free and do something dangerous like, I don't know, more money for medicine and education? Dangerous thought. Do I want to do business as usual? The normalcy of civilization, the banality of bureaucracy, and focus on GDP as a measure of our country's success. Notice that GDP increases when war increases. Or do I want another measure for how well society is doing? An undomesticated, wild measure like, are the poor fed? Are the children looked after? Are the refugees welcomed? The normalcy of civilization and the banality of bureaucracy, or an invitation to a gospel that is wild, that is dangerous, that is unauthorized, that is unauthored, and asks the simple questions like, are the widows and orphans looked after? Are the hungry fed? Are the refugees given a safe and comfortable home? It's exhausting to live wild, undomesticated, untamed, and free, because you will always be battered by the normalcy of civilization and the banality of bureaucracy. And we're given words of comfort from the very nature of the parables themselves, that when we make these decisions, those decisions bear fruit beyond our wildest dreams. And I might just end with the words, if I can remember them, from a concentration camp. And they went something like this: I believe in sunshine, even when there is no sun. And I believe in good, even when there is evil. And I believe in God, even when God appears absent. The normalcy of civilization, the banality of bureaucracy, or the wild, untamed life of a mustard seed.
Now may the wisdom of God, the love of God, and the grace of God strengthen you always to be Christ's hands and heart in the world. And the peace of God, which passes all understanding, keep you in the knowledge and love of God and the Holy Trinity, now and forever.